so welcome. I'm so glad to have you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's really fantastic to speak with you today.
Yeah, it's so much fun to do these shows, and I'm going to start out with a couple of rapid fire questions for this season. So, just
Nice.
answer with whatever comes to mind off the top of
Okay.
your
No
head.
pressure.
All right. So, what is the one thing you love to do or create the most?
I mean, it kind of always goes back to painting for me. So I'll go with painting. If I do, I have only one choice.
No.
I mean,
Although
my
it did
process.
say one thing, but
I
no.
mean, I'll go. I mean, my process. We'll probably maybe we'll talk about this later, but it's kind of a lot of interconnected parts. So I mean, I think there's a bit of a hierarchy where in the end, painting is the thing that I find most challenging and
Hmm.
therefore kind of most fulfilling. So, but drawing, digital media, sound, music, video, anything 2D printmaking, right? And it's really the kind of symbiotic relationship between those things. But in the end, I think I'm always looking for how it's going to feed the painting. So,
Yeah, yeah. All right. Number two, what is the one thing you hate to create or do the most?
um, ooh, that's tricky. I mean, I don't know if stretching canvas counts, but I hate priming and building canvases. That's one thing I could do without. You know, I don't know. I mean, I think if there's something I hate to create, I probably don't create it. I would say so.
All right. So, question number three. What is the number one top selling, top grossing, or most successful piece of art or thing that you've ever done? Is there one thing that has gotten you more recognition, like one piece or one whatever? Like, what is that one thing that you've had hit?
Hmm. Um, I don't know if there's anything of that. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not like crazy famous. So I mean, I had a piece in one of my early exhibitions that sold for what at that time for me was was an amount that I actually didn't even feel comfortable with. And
Yes.
so yeah, and but then the story was then it was returned later because the collector didn't think it was going to make enough money later on at auction that I hadn't my market value hadn't risen enough within like 6 months. So that's kind of tells you something about the art market, right? And ultimately
Wow.
why I kind of just really withdrew from that part of it in a way, right? This idea of making work solely for its kind of commercial value is something that
Yeah.
I had to grapple with for a while. So
Fine art is an investment. I remember there was a guy down here around me that started a gallery for a little while, and that was his marketing, was that fine art was an investment. So he was looking at it as an investment opportunity for people
right.
and the growth. And certainly in New York and some of the big cities, isn't that the trend to look at and purchase art as an investment that
Mm-hmm.
is going to accrue in value like a stock?
Right. Oh, it's absolutely the stock, and people. The problem is, the returns people can get on it. I mean, my sort of thing with it is if someone wants to buy it as an investment and they love the work, right? That's great, but it's the speculation of not really caring about what the work is and just putting it in a warehouse and kind of sitting on it. And then, of course, getting upset with I mean, I've had people email me and say, well, what are you doing? Why, and I'm being an artist, I'm making art, but they feel like, well, I bought this because I need to sell it at like a, 5,000% markup, which I would never see. Right. And this is the sort of thing with the secondary market. Anyhow, that's, that's
No,
a whole long discussion.
no, but that's the kind of discussion I like to have on these. This is what's fun about it, is because you never hear about that angle of people who are buying work
Mm-hmm.
and then turning around and reselling it for profit.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and we as the artists don't benefit from that. But that's amazing that they've actually emailed you and said, "Hey, what are you doing to increase the value of your artwork for
Yeah.
my monetary gain?"
Yeah. And the question's posed in a way it's kind of not like, hey, what are you doing? It's like, what are you doing? Like, do you do anything? are you making art? Are you trying? Like my whole goal is just to like try to up my sort of status and my market value, which is a really tricky thing when you start to read about how galleries work, how they kind of control their artists' markets.
Yeah.
It's an insane business. That the blue chip level is it's totally about this idea of making returns, and it's very specifically calculated, and it's something. I
It
mean,
is.
that's fine, and I don't have anything against. I mean, I don't, it's not a direction I strive for, and I don't have any issues with artists who are doing that and benefiting from it, especially as long as you're making good work. I mean, I think as an artist, artists deserve to make a living, and hopefully they're taking that money and putting it into making good work. When an artist just kind of keeps churning out the same thing over and over because they know it can sell,
They found a niche.
they found the niche. And I know people need to make money, and if people, I mean, there's so many ways to be an artist, and in the end, I think that if you're happy making the work, I mean, that's important. And if people want it, then I have no problems with that. But I think I don't know if it's, I think and I'm not talking about artists who are selling things for like, a couple $100 or, I'm talking about artists who are like, well, I know I can keep making this thing and sell it at, $100,000 or $500,000.
Wow.
And that sort of stuff is, and also, I mean, if you keep making the same thing at that level, it's gonna, I mean, it's, then you get into like saturating the market, and then work becomes devalued, and
my thought process is that it really depends on your focus and what your underlying goal is. Is your underlying goal to create a new style? Like one of the artists I talked to in season 5, he just patented a technique. That's like something that you hear in the art history books, this idea of coming up with a new style. But then I've also talked to artists whose goal is primarily financial, and to show up the galleries and to say, I can do this on my own, and to be in that high level market doing fashion work and doing, really high level stuff. And then I've also talked to quilt designers who make quilting patterns or glass blowers. And it really depends on, what your passion is. So, okay. So we're in the rapid fire questions. We did, what do you love to make? You said painting, but a whole symphony of things. What do you hate? You said stretching canvas. And what was your number one top selling thing? So, or the most successful thing that hit? So it was a painting, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was actually a large scale drawing. So it was a work on paper, but it's a painting on paper, I guess you would say, but works on paper tend to be called drawings. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So number 4, what is the weirdest or funniest experience you've ever had as an artist? Has anything ever been stolen, dropped, destroyed? And, it could be tragic too.
Yeah. There are a number. I mean, I think that story I just told, I guess, unfortunately, I don't mean to, I wish I'd come up with new material, but the idea of someone returning, a piece of work that I had, that like for me was a kind of this big affirming thing, in my young artistic career. And then the gallerist says, oh, well, they gave it back to me, and the gallery they weren't going to make me give the money back. So the gallery had to take the hit. And then, okay, so actually, this story does go someplace else, because it's actually become something very fascinating to me. So the gallery had to take this work back.
Right.
And then
I've never heard of that. So
well, it's actually kind of common in galleries in New York, because the idea is like, and maybe I'm giving their secrets away, I don't know. But if you're working with like a certain clientele base, and it's like this idea of like being happy with the product, right? And if someone, there might be like a 6-month time frame where it's like, okay, well, if like you don't love this, we'll be willing to take it, and it's different with every gallery, with every client. It's not like it's some like, that's a thing. Galleries can be very handshake. And as far as I know,
collectors collect, so they want them coming back and collecting more.
Exactly. You're trying
to keep complete sense.
Yeah, exactly. They're trying to maintain their base. So they took the work back, and then the gallery, they didn't ask me for the money back, luckily, because
Thank God.
I'd already spent it. It was spent before I had it, because I was living in New York. And so I so they had to then resell the work, right, to try to recoup some of the money. And I think they couldn't sell it for, as you know, of course it was a 50-50 split, in terms of what they took and what they gave me. So then they had to sell it for kind of like half the initial price, essentially. And so they sold it. Years later, Amazon, for a while, I don't know if Amazon still has this, but Amazon tried to get into the art game, and they had this kind of like art, like sale site, and I think you would register as an artist or a gallery. And so suddenly, I think I was curious, as the gallery shut down in the meantime, and I didn't know what happened to that work. It was, just kind of lost to me. So I kind of started searching for it. And I found it come up on the Amazon site for like a really ridiculous price. Like someone must have paid, I don't know if they overpaid for it themselves, and then they marked it up. But it's on a site with a lot of interesting artists, on a gallery, like a lot of interesting artists. And it was up there for a while, and then it kind of disappeared. And then it showed up at another gallery a few years later. And it was also being sold for maybe a slightly lower, but still kind of, to me, ridiculous price. And then since then, it's kind of just disappeared, and I have no sense of what's happened to it. But I kind of love that. Like I have this real curiosity about the idea. I mean, I like this idea that my work gets out there and it floats around, and I don't really know where it is, but it's kind of having this life of its own, right?
Yeah, it's like a child. It's gone out of the nest and it's having its own life. But isn't that also frustrating in a way as an artist, that like you've released it and you can't track it? Like at least children call home.
Yeah. I like the I like to think, and I like to kind of make up stories about it and think like, maybe someone has, it's a big piece. It's like 6 by 8 feet at least. And it's
a big piece.
It's multi panels of paper that have to fit together. And it was never really properly mounted. So part of me likes to think like maybe someone got in there like, hey, we're going to like properly, build out a support for this and mount it. And maybe it's hanging in a public space because it's so large. Or part of me is like, it could be sitting like in someone's basement, like rotting away. But they're both really, I'm not very precious about my work. Like it's both those things are really interesting to me. If I had a piece of work that like I thought was, that I loved and I thought it was like rotting away or something happened to it, yeah, I kind of feel like it's too bad. But if it's like something, and this is a piece I actually really like. It was a very important, I think, piece in terms of my sort of development. So yeah, but I like to think about, maybe someday it'll turn up.
Awesome. Very cool. So the last one is, what is the most important piece of advice you would give to yourself if you were just starting out today?
Yeah, that's a good question for the seniors I'll have this year. So, I mean, the most important advice is, and I give this to students a lot, and I think it's something that I tried to tell myself, but sometimes it was hard to take the advice, which is it's a long,
is when you're 18, 20, 25. 45.
It's a long game, right? And it's the kind of marathon, not the sprint. And there's times when you have to sprint and you have to try to capitalize on opportunities. But there are times, and kind of looking back at some things that I went through, there are times when it just feels like it's not happening, it's not working out, and it's like, this is it. Like, I never said I was never going to make art again, but it's kind of like this, more like this, because I always was totally committed. That's something I don't think I'll ever question, but it's this idea that, well, it's never going to go anywhere. It's never really going to amount to anything. But you also have to have a sense of what's that? Like, what do you want it to amount to? Right.
Yeah. And that's a discussion I've had with friends and relatives frequently. They'll ask you that. Right. I mean, if you're an artist, you're 100% committed to it. But isn't that the quintessential theoretical, angst of the artist of, why am I doing this if I'm not hitting?
Yeah. Well, to me, it's kind of the opposite. Like, I would be happy in a basement painting like kind of all day.
Yes.
Maybe people see it. Maybe they they don't, I mean, I show work because, to me, it's something that pushes the work. And I think you have, in terms of the development, I mean, it's not that to me, like, openings are kind of the scariest thing, because I have to go, and it's like, I don't really like having that sort of I mean, artists make art usually because they're introverted, right? And the art's kind of the thing that's speaking for themselves. I mean, a lot of artists, certainly there are plenty of artists who want attention, right? But for me, it's never been a question that, like, I love to make the work, and I'm totally fascinated by the process, by, just the element of surprise. I mean,
yeah.
That's why I'm always trying, I always have this thing where I want to try something kind of new. I mean, I think my work there's some consistency, but it's also kind of wildly inconsistent. But it's because I don't want to predict what it's going to be. It's not much satisfaction in that for me. So, I think that, I lost my train there, but
that's all right. It leads right into A for art. So I always try and organize these with this acronym, the appeals system, right? The appeals acronym stands for art, product, presentation, educating your audience with story, or how do you educate your audience? Amplifying, getting bigger, licensing and contract terms in plain English, and success. How do you measure and define success? So you create artwork, and your artwork's a little bit abstract, kind of, wouldn't you say? How would you describe your art, and how did you find your niche or style? Like, how has it developed?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think to take it back to sort of, the beginning, or lowest common denominator, I've always been fascinated by that line between abstraction and representation, right? So for me, it's I've always thought about kind of, okay, maybe I'm a little bit more on the representational side, maybe I'm a little bit more on the abstract side, but also that idea of just the definition of what's representational and what's abstract. I mean, over the years, it's been great to talk to certain artists whose work might seem totally abstract, non-objective, non-representational, and they, yet when you talk to them, they say, oh no, this work it's not abstract, it's representational, right? So it's like, and then they tell you why, and they tell you kind of how, and so I kind of go back and forth, and in the last, I think going back about 10 years or so now, I decided to go, I wanted my work went completely abstract, right? I wanted it to be totally non-representational, not even having references, because for years I was kind of, the computer's an important part of my process. It was early on for a long time, because I would kind of work up images and ideas on the computer, making digital kind of mock-ups, collages.
Photoshop?
Photoshop. And that's always been an important part of my process. And it's for a while, it's hard to see the line between, like, is this piece kind of, is it a study, or is it an end in and of itself? Like, is this a finished work, right? So I grappled with that. So I felt like for a few years, I just wanted to get away from using the computer and as part of the painting process. And I was making paintings that were just purely really about the painting process, and about letting the painting develop organically, very kind of reactionary, and things like that. And that allowed me to figure out my relationship with the computer, and going, and I eventually kind of went back to Photoshop. And again, that's become part of my process. So the work's become more representational. After a while, I felt like the sort of non-objective work was becoming it didn't have enough in it for me, I guess, right? In terms of what I wanted, maybe the audience to grapple with, and the kind of tension I wanted to create.
What do you want the audience to grapple with? What are some of your themes and reoccurring symbols that show up throughout your work?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of my work has to do with how we, honestly, how we're fed and perceive information on a daily basis. I mean, I'm of the generation
And
Yeah,
here we are on a podcast feeding
we're-
you information.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, since I think in college, I started to get into this idea of how, the media, it shapes sort of the narrative and how what we consume, as sort of visual consumers and consumers of information, you have to really be attuned and kind of aware of where things are coming from, right?
Yeah.
It goes back to some things that
Well, especially as a professor, do you find yourself all the time being like, no, that's not a valid source. You can't use Wikipedia.
yeah, it's become a big thing with actually teaching. I mean, the great example of that is something like Instagram, right? And I mean, no, Instagram I think is very interesting in many ways, and it's
Well, it's
great
a
for.
marketing platform. It's a fantastic marketing platform, but it is not a primary source.
It's not authoritative. And so the thing I run up against is like when I have students do artist copies, for example, right? It's this idea of like you want to do an artist copy and kind of find that primary source of a certain style or genre, right? So
Wait,
like
what is an artist copy? Define that for us real quick.
the artist copy just you would copy a painting from another artist, so you might copy Cezanne's Bathers or something along those lines, so trying to make it as perfect as you can, right?
Right. And what do
And
you learn from that? What is the purpose of that?
well, you're learning everything from composition, color, paint application, technique, and process, right? Because it's about deconstructing that work and trying to get a sense of, if this is where the painting arrived, how did it start, right? Kind of breaking apart layers and saying, did the artist start with a colored ground? Did the artist start with a sketch? I mean, it's great there's a great Matisse exhibition at MoMA a few years back where they had x-rayed a lot of the paintings, and you could see the underpaintings
Ooh.
where he moved an arm. You could see where he had a plant and took it out, right? So this idea of like, students sometimes think like, it's debunking that genius theory in many ways, that the artist has had like a grand vision and painted it, right? It's
Right.
no, you put these things down, it becomes this kind of chess match. You have to take something out, you have to change the color, you have to, so that's the artist copy thing. But what's happened with like, it used to be like, go to the library, find 3 books on artists that you're interested in. It's a chance to look through artists, become more familiar. And then you're going to do a copy from one of those artists. And in, recent years, the last decade, really, it's saying, you can't use Instagram, you can't use the internet. And lo and behold, most students maybe get a book from the library. But students aren't as familiar with going to the library. It's not something that they, is as easy for them to do anymore, right? And because it's so easy to just, the first thing, even if I say go to the library, the first thing they do is go onto Instagram and start to look at artists, right? And then they go to the library and they find, well, these artists aren't in the library. So then they say, but I want to do this painting, right? And so then they bring in a painting that looks like kind of like a fake Van Gogh or a fake Diebenkorn, and that's this idea that like, okay, that's great. Like if that is a painting that has maybe evolved to a certain point, but it's kind of just derivative of like another artist. So you should just do the copy from that artist, right? And really
Right.
learn from the source. So anyhow, it's hard to escape. Yeah. But anyhow, going back to my work in the internet, I kind of came of age with the internet, and this idea, like early on, the internet was just this kind of, wild west of a lot of randomness, I guess you'd say, right? There was some.
I remember it. I remember it well.
Right? Some was interesting, some was totally random, some was shocking, somewhat, but it wasn't horribly useful, right? Always. It was kind of a curiosity. And so
Free Toby. Sorry, totally random reference.
So I think that, in the end, like, I started to really become aware of like, where information comes from, but how it shapes us, right? And I think that in and even like something like television, right? Like how does like advertising, how does like watching these kind of things over and over shape the way that we perceive and understand and see the world? And this idea that maybe we're not always being, people aren't always being as critical, just kind of taking things at face value. So my work plays recent work kind of deals with grapples with some of that stuff. And it's not, it's not like I want people to look at it and just say like, I'm not trying to like teach a lesson necessarily. It's more that like that's the jumping off point.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Let's have a dialogue about it. And that actually is a great question for P, for product. So let's talk about your process. I love to get into the process a little bit with some of our artists, particularly painters. So you're using Photoshop and digital to inform your painting, which in and of itself is kind of a new modern thing, right? Artists used to use sketches and studies out in the field and then come back to the studio and perfect that work. But now you're referencing media and how media gives us information and the internet. What is your process for creating your work?
So my process,
give us a blow by blow. Give us a step by step.
Yeah, give you a blow by blow. I mean, it's I try to think of my process as being, for one thing, not, totally in the box, I guess, is one thing I'll preface this with, and fairly expansive. And I'm always looking for those relationships between mediums. So I don't want it to be linear. I'd say it's a very non-linear process where things, digital might feed into a drawing, might feed into a print, might feed into a painting. Maybe an idea in the painting goes back to digital. I mean, right. I'll take a painting that I've started and I'll take a picture of that, and sometimes and then if I'm struggling with something or just curiosity, what happens if I change a color? What happens if I put this thing over here?
Oh, so you'll actually take a painting, put it in the computer and manipulate it in Photoshop. So you're going backwards. Then do you print it out and paint on top of it again? Or what do you...
I mean, sometimes I print, sometimes I just have the iPad there, and and I just kind of like look. Sometimes I just try to work from memory. I mean, it's always like trying not to fall into too much of a rut of doing the same. I never really want to approach it the same way. I mean, if I think it's working the same way, then I will. But I find like if I'm in a place where it's kind of not going in an interesting direction, or I'm not really challenging myself, then I'll mix it up.
Where do you get your source images? What do you start with as reference? Do you just use intuition and memory, or do you take your own photographs? Do you go to museums? Where do you get your inspiration and source imagery?
It's a great question. It's very wide ranging and very open. I'm a real sort of collector of images and kind of an image junkie, and really I'm really fascinated by I guess I'm into like aesthetic languages and how we, as part of also what I do, I'm talking about consuming information, how the aesthetic of something, before we even get into what the content or the subject is, how that relates something, right? And how we perceive that. So for example, if we look at like a photograph from the 1970s, right, it's going to kind of trigger and tell us something about the time, right? If we look at something that's very graphic, we're going to perceive that in a way that's different than if it's naturalistic, right? So I really try to mine images. I mean, the internet's a treasure trove of random craziness, right? So
yeah, it's a lot of. Do you take screen captures?
Yeah, I mean, whatever it takes. I'll pull it off the site, or I'll do a screen capture, and I just keep folders of things. But then I'm also a collector of old, I've hundreds and hundreds of old random books, magazines, pictures. I get it. I go through phases of taking my own photos. Sometimes it's like I forget about the camera for a while, and then I see something interesting, and I'm like, wow, like I need, this would be a great painting. And sometimes you stumble across something, and it's like that's like a painting waiting to happen, right? And so it's really all of these things, and I love the idea of like how it all aggregates, right? Because you have things
together. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it comes together. Some things happen in the moment. Some things are like, it might be a random image from Popular Science in 1952, right? That then is being like inserted into like a landscape that I saw yesterday.
So do you put it all up on a wall? You tape it to a wall, or in a billboard or a cork board, you stick it all up? Or you said you use Photoshop sometimes too. Do you composite it there?
Yeah, I usually recently what I've really actually loved to do in terms of working up images is using a version of Photoshop on the iPad, which I'm scared. I think they're discontinuing it. I think it's called Photoshop Cut, or I forget the name. Anyhow, it's this kind of limited version of Photoshop that's meant for just kind of cutting and pasting, but
Cool.
it's really rudimentary. Like it doesn't do, like you can't do a lot of things in it. And I've actually
Sometimes simple is best,
yeah,
right?
I really got into the limitations of it. And so I would it'd be a great way to just sometimes sit around with the iPad and feel like I could be any place, which is cool to kind of change your location if you're always sitting like in the desk of the computer in the same
Yeah.
place. You're in the same mindset. So the iPad allowed me to be like, hey, what happens if I'm like here, outside, like working on something? And I just start, scrolling through these banks of images or folders of images and seeing things that kind of speak to me, thinking like, hey, this might be an interesting atmosphere, kind of stage
Mm-hmm.
for something. And what can I insert into that? And what kind of narrative starts to form? Like, oh, like look at this, ridiculous thing from an advertisement. I can't believe it people would latch onto that, or so let's kind of get a little commentary going with something like that, right? And then yeah, I start to, and I felt like part of my downfall earlier, like 10 years ago with Photoshop, was I was spending too much time on these digital pieces, and that was fine if I wanted it to be an end, right? But as a
Right.
painting study, I wanted something that still had some potential and some openness. I still needed problems to solve. And I was getting into this thing where I was getting too precious with the initial study, and I was trying to copy it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I find that I found that when I was teaching is students would get attached to their digital files more
Yeah,
so than their sketches.
right.
Maybe because it took so much more effort. I don't know. Um, so how do you present this work? If you're having this commentary about media and our relationship to advertising and information overload and so forth and so on, and you're working between Photoshop and painting, and so the physical and the digital, that brings up a conundrum in presentation, doesn't it? So what how do you present your work?
I mean, I guess it depends on the nature of the exhibition. I mean, honestly, a lot of the digital work, it doesn't really see the light of day in terms of something that I exhibit or
You
would
don't post to Instagram every day?
I don't post to Instagram. I mean, I've tried it. Friends always say, like, why aren't you doing people would love to see, this or that. And I'll do it I mean, I think last year I went on and one day I just put on 30 things and I was like, all right, that's probably good for the year, right? So, I
I
go for
once did 3 years of posting to Instagram every day for straight for 3 years, and that was an amazing experience because it made the work. Well, you'll have to look at it, but it's Aaron dot circles, and I started out with the idea that I was only allowed to draw a circle, like an ENSO, and
nice.
then so the first year it was only circles,
Wow.
only shape allowed, and then the second year I allowed line to come in. And
Nice.
then the third year it was still circle and line, but yeah, and it was a fascinating process because that accountability of having to present something, even though it was just Instagram every single day, it made the work change because even when I didn't feel like
Right.
drawing a circle, I gave myself permission to just draw a simple circle. And Neil Gaiman, right? Famous author or whatever. I find it interesting. One of his interviews with Tim Ferriss, he talks about giving your self permission to just do the simplest things. Like
Yeah.
he's like, I must create every single day, but I
Mhm.
give myself permission to just sit there and doodle on the paper if nothing's coming to me.
Totally. It's
Um,
about
yeah.
the act, right? It's about letting yourself get into it and not always, taking that pressure off. I think yeah, what you did sounds fantastic, right?
Thanks.
Having this sort of limitation. Did you get something, I mean, out of that in the end? You feel like that's pushed you to a different place?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It created a whole different style for me for my
Mhm.
bigger works. I started at the end doing these circle paintings, almost like pointillism or impressionism, where you're allowing the mark to be seen, but the mark itself was a circle. So the basis for the artwork became the circles.
Yeah.
The underpainting became the circles, and then the top layer became detail work,
Right.
which is the way of working.
Yeah.
So it was fascinating, and I did end up licensing that work, a number of those pieces, with my art agent, and they're available on some of the big platforms now for the wall and home decor vertical.
Nice.
So anyways, talking about presentation, so you've been in the fine art galleries in New York City and stuff like that, and you're also a professor at a very awesome school. What tips or tricks would you tell people about presenting, particularly
Um,
maybe for the fine art world?
yeah, I mean, uh, tips and tricks for, I mean,
Rules?
rules.
Well, oh, okay, I'll give you an example.
Yeah,
I had
yeah,
a piece of work that I did that was a social commentary. It was kind of a satirical piece about selfies.
yes,
Okay. And I made the whole thing, it was a process piece. So it was kind of cartoon like, and I made
right,
it in the phone.
yeah,
And it got into a show in New York about feminist identity. How do
right.
we identify as a woman? And as part of the satirical nature of the piece, I had it framed like this kind of Baroque,
Oh, yeah, sure.
um, you know, black frame, very floral, a lot of detail work in the wood with little gold trim and double matte and stuff like that. Well, when I sent it to them, they wrote back and they said, it doesn't go with the show. We won't hang it.
Really? Jeez.
Because New York and a lot of these galleries are really into that very minimalist classic framing. They want, white matte, simple black metal frame or simple black wood frame, but they hadn't specified that. And the piece
Right.
itself was satirical. So, why shouldn't the frame be part of the message?
The frame is part of the piece, no matter what, right?
Right. So, how do you frame your pieces? Do you paint around the edges and not frame them? Do you use this more modern aesthetic of simple framing? Like, what do you do for your pieces?
I don't frame, yeah, I don't frame paintings. I'll frame, and I'm actually, I mean, for me, I just, because I do think the frame becomes part of the work, right? And so, I've seen paint, I mean, I was at the Met last week and there was a
Ooh.
painting, there's this, it's like a 15th century, Italian painting, and it had this beautiful frame, right? And it was just so, it had this incredible dialogue with the portrait, itself, and it just, it transformed that piece that you can't at that point just see it as like a painting, right? You're seeing
Mm-hmm.
this, it's now becomes this object, right? And I don't
Right.
want me, I don't want my paintings to be seen as anything really beyond the painting, right? The surface. And actually, I'm not against framing. Certainly, I did an exhibition last year, or maybe right before the pandemic. I've been working on collaborative paintings with a good friend of mine, and we did an exhibition of them in New York, and
Ooh, fun.
it was really fun. And it was just like we had made over like a few years, like 50 or maybe 60-ish paintings, and we decided we wanted the exhibition to be all of the paintings because we felt it was about this big conversation between these works. And we decided to because there's a lot of disparity in the work, we decided to frame them as a way to kind of unite the group, right? And so I think in that sense, and they're just very simple kind of wood strip frames.
That's a great way to hold a show together.
Yeah, and it was really interesting for me because for so long I hadn't framed. I mean, I like thinking about this idea of the painting as something that's on a support. It sort of has a relationship to the wall, but it protrudes from it. I mean, I'm always interested in like the edges of the painting, like how paint kind of spills over and maybe is kind of splattered, and
So
and
beautiful. The edges are gorgeous.
right, yeah,
It's the beauty is in the edge.
it gives you the sense of the dimensionality of the work. I mean, I don't think it always works because it can impede, I think, on I also love this idea of the actual edge of the work, right? So, how something comes up to the edge an element, in the painting, and the side of the painting can sometimes distract from that. So depending on if I think the side kind of works, maybe it's like this evidence of the process, and it sort of just speaks to like what's on the actual surface, and kind of extends the painting a little bit more, then I think that's great. If it gets too busy, sometimes I'll just paint the edges white. Or if a gallery is like really intent on the whole thing of like the edges have to be clean, which to me is just like, it has nothing to do with anything. If they're not seeing the actual work, then I might give in and do that. But and then with works on paper, I'll frame those in simple metal frames. But I think your point about presentation is an important one. It's something we work with students on all the time. Is that the exhibition becomes its own thing, right?
Right.
You make work, and the exhibition then takes the work a step further. It transforms the work. So what are the considerations with an exhibition and that idea of presentation? And we get students, we try to challenge that. Like students just think like, well, I should frame it, hang it on a wall, and I'm done with it. It's presented. If it's in a frame, it must be good, right? And it's like, well, it has to be in the right frame. It has to be in a frame that is actually, working to elevate the work. And sometimes maybe the frame's not right. Maybe you should just use thumbtacks and show the torn edge, because that edge is creating a tension there. And so we really try to
Decaling. I love deckled paper, that ripped edge paper, especially like watercolor paper or that thicker, real texture paper. And yeah, then you could use like a floating frame. Although those always scare me, because the whole point of the frame is to get is to protect the piece. And if the piece is up against the glass, then you're actually destroying it. But this also applies in product design and development, is you've got to present the work. You've got to, if you've turned your artwork into a product, you have to present it. And in the end, artwork is somewhat of a product. Even when we're making art just for ourselves, it's still a product of our imagination, of our human experience. It's a product of us. So talking about that, let's talk about education. So we've done art, product, presentation. Let's talk about educating your audience. But now, of course, you're a professor, so you're educating students and artists every day. But communication with the collector and with the gallery and telling stories around your work. This is a theme that I'm finding in these podcasts. The point of the podcast is to find these commonalities, these common themes between artists, the thread that, holds us all together, regardless of our substrate or medium or style or whatever. So how do you educate your audience? How do you find that it's best to tell the story of your work?
Do you mean in the actual work, or how do I explain my work verbally or through writing?
Yes. Yes, verbally and through writing. Like, how do you communicate what you're trying to achieve? Obviously, since you're fine artist, you probably do an artist statement, right?
I will, when I think it's appropriate.
Right. Do you also do any sort of, when you go to a museum, they have these lovely little plaques on the side with the write-up of the piece. I love those. I love reading them. My family, it drives them nuts. They're like, you don't have to read every single one. Yes, I do. Yes, I have to. But what advice would you give to your students or artists or creatives about sharing the story of your work? What are some of the ways that you like to use to educate your audience?
It's a great question. I mean, I'm always happy to I'm someone who I believe in, in what art is. Art is art, right? So the idea that it's communicating something is going to communicate something different to everyone, right? And some people are very curious to know exactly what the artist's intention is, right? And why are you doing it? What is it? What's in there? There must be something. You must know exactly what this is. And I don't always know exactly what it is, right? And to me, that's what makes it interesting. And I'm fine with it. I always tell students.
How do you communicate that though? So, well, you don't have to literally describe a piece when you're communicating or educating your audience. You don't have to be like, oh, this is a painting of a duck.
Right.
But, you have some very deep concepts in your work. How do
Mhm.
you share that without um, uh, instilling your own preconceived notions on the viewer?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the artist statement is a really tricky thing, right? And so I mean, I'm usually doing it through some sort of statement. I mean, I usually, have something that's written about a specific series, for example, right? And
Mm-hmm.
right, crafting something where the language hits the right note and it doesn't sound too lofty and BS. I mean, students like, this is a thing like we senior year, we spend like an entire year trying to get to like a good paragraph about your work, right? Because an artist statement, yeah, you don't want it to go on and on and on. I mean, at least I don't, right? You want to get to the point, but you want it to sound, you don't want it to be kind of overloaded with art speak or things that just sound BS. I mean, I want things that are hopefully generally, that will appeal to a range of audiences. So people who are really familiar with art, people who might be less familiar with art. I try to be fairly, hopefully somewhat straightforward and kind of down to earth, I guess, about, kind of honest about what I'm doing with the work, where yeah, even though there are to me there are things in the work that are coming from very specific places,
Right.
but I always tell students, like, I mean, I think part of it is like, do you want a work of art in the end to be sealed, like hermetically sealed into this way where like nothing can be read into it? I always tell students, like, I don't mind the painting like almost falling, or work of art falling a little bit short maybe,
Uh-huh.
we might just call that openness, right? But this idea that everything has to be perfect in the end, right? I still want, to me, that space is about the viewer, that those things that you don't totally complete, right? Or totally finish, that's for the viewer to kind of insert themselves. And so to me, it's this kind of rapport and maybe a conversation that the work has with the viewer and with my and for myself, right? Like I look at, I might look at a painting from 4 years ago and go like,
Yeah.
oh, I kind of I kind of see what I was trying to do there. What like I thought the narrative was, I was not really clear on it, and then suddenly it comes through, right? Like I'm
Right.
not looking for things to be totally figured out by the time I put them out there, and I'm happy putting them out there like that. I mean, I don't mind something, I don't mind taking that risk. I know there are a lot of artists who, some artists say, don't ever show something if you're not sure. And how are you sure? I don't know. I don't like, it would take
So
me 10
so
years
maybe
to
showing it is part of the conversation. So you feel like the work grows. And so maybe you write about it and then show it, and then both the writing and the work evolves together.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that, I mean, ideally, I think, writing throughout the process of making is really important, right?
Oh,
Because
so
that,
do you journal?
I mean, I don't know if I'd call it journaling, but I'll write about, I'll try to sit down, and sometimes it's just words. Sometimes it's just trying to write a few paragraphs about what like, let's say the show is tomorrow, like, what's this work going to do? Because I think that, that whenever it's a different thought process, right? And when you start to, and you slow down and you take, it's a different, just a different way of thinking about the work. And I think that timing and pacing of the work is so important. I've always had a problem of just like wanting to plow through things too, like really quickly. I mean, I could
Right.
probably do a series of paintings in a week if someone told me I had to, right?
Right.
But would they be good? I don't. Maybe they'd be better than the ones I take. I mean, that I'm really, I think that's one of the biggest challenges about making work, is that for me, the way I work, it's how much, So I try to like step back from the work and give it a little time to breathe, and not just kind of kill it, not just feel like,
Right.
oh, I have
Right.
to do something.
I think it's really interesting. So you do write about the work a little bit as you're creating it, and then do you revisit those notes for that artist statement?
Yeah, I'll revisit those notes, and I'd say like 9 times out of 10, I'm kind of like mortified at what I wrote initially, and but sometimes there's one really like good. There's like one sentence, right, and
Right.
that's
Right.
like I try to, I just try to get students to free write, and to kind of, it's like you're not going to get to the point of the work trying to just write like one paragraph or a few sentences. Like you need to write like probably like 2 or 3 pages or more, and like in that, like, after like an hour or half an hour, like you're going to get a sentence that's going to like finally kind of
Right.
get it,
Right.
you know.
Have you heard of Morning Pages by I think her name was Julie Cameron? She wrote The
Oh,
Artist's Way. The
sure.
Artist's Way is a pretty famous book for creativity, and she
Yeah.
encourages morning pages, she calls them, and she says you should write 3 pages of longhand cursive every morning to try and to have this clarity for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
So I think that's really neat. I write a little bit on the backs of my pieces sometimes,
Oh, nice.
a little bit of thought, what medium I'm using, how the paint flows, what
Hmm.
inspired the work. You never
Yeah.
know,
I
and
like
that's
that.
nice to come back to. And for some people, that's more interesting than anything else. So, all right, art, product, presentation, educating with story or writing, and amplifying. Oh, here's the hard one. Well, maybe not the hard one, but how do you get bigger? This is like the money question. How do
Yeah.
you amplify? How do you get out there and increase your reach? And you're a professor and you're a fine artist. So this takes a little bit of a different form, maybe. What would be the one thing you say that has really worked for you to get the message about your artwork out there? How do you do it all or get the word out there without getting overwhelmed?
Well, I mean, there's an ebb and flow, I think, to that. As a, I mean, I consider myself a teaching artist, and that's a focus,
Yeah,
for me. Yes,
that's a
to come.
thing.
Yeah, I mean, so during the school year, I'm 100% in on teaching, and I'm always making, because my teaching is better when I'm active in the studio. And I learned
Right.
so much. The best thing about teaching is I learned so much from the students. I mean, I think the best thing about teaching is that you're allowed to, on a daily basis, see that like initial kind of thing that you were attracted to in terms of wanting to be an artist, and that kind of just
Yeah.
that, like, that very kind of fresh energy and curiosity. And that's the thing that I think is the worst thing to lose as you go forward, right? Like, and to be
Right.
reminded of that every day, to like those things, that just those simple things of like loving a medium, maybe, or being fascinated by a shape or a form or a relationship between forms, is like,
Yeah.
it's very grounding. And so I find a lot of inspiration to work during the semester, because as I'm teaching, it's like so many, usually when I'm teaching, I start saying things to students that are like solving, they're coming from this place of like the problems that I'm grappling with, but I'm not even aware of. And I say,
They solve your problems for you
I'll
when
be
you're
talking
supposed to be solving their problems. They solve yours. I
yeah,
get it. I get it. I used to teach, and it's amazing that moment when they have that light bulb, isn't it?
it's the best thing about teaching, when you see them, like something like all of a sudden clicks, right? Like, I think intro drawing
Hmm.
is a great example, where you get a lot of students who come in and say, especially at a liberal arts college like Dickenson, students maybe haven't had an art class before, or it's not going to be a focus, but they want to do it, and they say, I'm really scared, I've never taken a class in art, I don't, I don't know how to draw, and I don't think I can draw. And to teach drawing in this way, to kind of tell them it's, it's a language, right? You're going to learn the different components, and we're going to kind of put this together. And like around mid-semester, things start to click, and you just see that they're in disbelief. We'll critique a homework drawing, and they'll say, like, I I can't believe that I did this, right? And that's the best thing you can ever hear as an instructor, right? That suddenly, like, someone like did something that they are super psyched about and never thought they were capable of. So yeah, so I think that that's a huge thing for me. But what question were we talking about?
We're talking true artist conversation, rambling and fun and
Yeah.
covering so many topics. So we were talking about amplifying, but it sounds like the students amplify you. The students amplify your work.
Yeah.
Um, one of the themes I hear over and over again from guests is that just networking, getting out there, showing the work, networking. Like you said, the students keep you fresh and amplify your work. So we were talking about how do you get bigger? What
Yeah.
do you find is the most successful thing for growing, amplifying your outreach.
And like you just said, getting your work to interesting, getting your work to places, getting it to
Well,
someplace where you
let's
think.
get specific here. How did you get into galleries in New York?
That's like a great mystery of the art world.
Right. And that's why I
How do you
ask
get
it
to
is I'm
galleries?
sure a lot of people watching are like, how do I get into a gallery in New
Yeah.
York?
I wish I had really solid advice on that, but I tell students this. It's about, if you have you have to kind of identify goals and say like, well, where do I want to get? Where do I want to be? And then you start to think, how am I going to get there? And like anything, it's not like you can necessarily go and just knock on their door and say, hey, like show my work.
Oh, you can't? That's what I do.
it's
No, I
about.
think you hit the meat of it there, right there, 2 seconds ago. So let me just repeat it. It's about setting a goal and figuring out how you're going to get there. I think that was fantastic advice
Yeah.
because when you actually write down a goal and
Mhm.
then you backtrack from that goal, okay, I want to be in a gallery in New York. Okay, how do I get there?
Yeah.
Um, well, I create a body of work.
Yeah.
I research a gallery that I think would like the work. I
Mhm.
find out who the curator is.
Right.
I find their email. I send them an email. I follow up, blah, blah, blah. You can backtrack from that goal.
And that's in a lot of cases, I always say the next part of that and I tell students is positioning yourself, right? Like
What does that term mean?
it's not,
Positioning.
like I just said, there's not always a direct path. So it's like making art, it's kind of like a general to specific or broad, so okay. And you mentioned it a second ago, like maybe there's a curator who is at a gallery, or a gallerist, right, who's curating an exhibition, and so that's an opportunity for you to get noticed, maybe, right? Like getting your work to places where then it's going to be seen, and it's going to lead to, getting your work out there is going to lead to opportunities. And I always tell students this right off the bat. They say, well, someone wants this piece of mine, and they said they only have this much money, and I feel like it's worth a little bit more. And I say, listen, it's up to you in the end what you're going to sell that for. But there's a lot of value in getting your work out into the world, right? Especially when you're young, because if it's getting out there, then someone else is going to see it, and they're going to say, who's that? And it's going to start to kind of propagate, right? So
Yeah.
there's that positioning to me is I think that's a key, right?
Yeah.
Getting your work to places where you think it's going to then maybe open up other opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you tell your students much about signatures? Do you ever talk about the artist's signature?
In what way?
Oh, in amplifying, it was interesting. Maria Brophy was on the show. She's the wife and agent of Drew Brophy, who's a surfboard artist. So he
Right.
does that really. He's actually kind of one of the founders of that really, well, surfboard style art. Like bright neon colors, kind of caricatures, marijuana leaves. Skulls, surfing tubes.
Yeah.
Very kind of late 60s, early 70s, like graphical surfer art.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyways, she was talking about how when he started, even when he was very in the beginning of his early stages, he always signed his surfboards, even when he was painting them for a company. And that has helped to really amplify his reputation over the years, and that people will still contact them today and say, I bought this surfboard. Is this an original Drew Brophy surfboard? Because he would paint surfboards. He still does.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so she would say, is it signed?
Right.
Because he always signed his work, and this is what his signature has always looked like.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is how you can tell if it's an original or not. And so
Interesting.
she said, her advice was always, always, always sign your work and make
Yeah.
it legible if you can,
Right.
because later on down the road, somebody might seek you out from that signature. And that's come up in a couple other episodes where artists have said, I signed this work. It wasn't that legible, but somebody did the research and found me from
Yeah.
looking up my signature.
Sure. It's important to, obviously, I mean, you want to, I mean, it's my frustration in grading, like put your name on your work, put your name, who wrong is this? I can't grade if I don't know who it
Oh,
belongs to, right? So
oh, I have had that
yeah,
experience
right.
so
So
many times.
making sure that, date, and I love the back of I think the back of a painting or a drawing becomes its own. Actually, there's an artist who did a great series of work. I think it was Arturo Herrera? No, yeah, maybe. Anyhow, it was about the backs of paintings and how they show this kind of famous paintings, and they show this sort of like life of the work, right? Because as they go to galleries around the world, they get stamped,
Oh,
or different collectors like sort of stamps, or
well,
or who.
Asian work collectors stamp on the front.
Right, stamp on the front. That's, yeah, exactly, identifying. And so, I love that idea that the back, you start as the artist and you put something on there, maybe other things get added to it. So we talk a little bit about that. We haven't, when we talk about the idea of, like, students are always curious about like the merits of signing your work on the front versus the back. And to me, that conversation goes towards framing, where, it's up to, you have to kind of consider the signature as part of the piece, right? At that point. So is it distracting from the work, or is it, is your name really big, or maybe you're going to play it up? Maybe that's like a style, like part of your like branding or something, right?
Yeah.
But to know that it's not just as simple as like, I'm going to kind of slap my name on there and not think about it.
Right.
My grandmother always gave me a real hard time about that. Todd, why don't you sign your paintings on the front? That's what artists do. It's like, well, Nana, it's
Oh, you called her Nana?
I sign,
Oh, that's what we
sign
call
them on
my
the
mom.
back, and that's, I don't, for me, I don't want to be, hung up on
Yeah.
my name. Yeah, but everyone's different. Some artists, that's and it's just, but it's being conscious of that decision. That's
Yes. When I was in college, I had a friend. I didn't sign my work, and she gave me a hard time and said, "Why aren't you signing your work? I want you to sign it. Sign it. Sign it for me." She collected a piece of mine. Sign it. And and at the time I remember thinking, "Oh, I'm not good enough yet."
right,
But
right.
you have to sign it because someday you just have to. And I've had another artist talk about how the back is free real estate, and he uses it for promotional things. So the back becomes a great place for him to put his write up of the story. Now, this is a photographer, but he
Mhm.
always tells a story about his photographs. Jeffrey Stoner, he was on the show, and his most popular work is these amazing photographs of goats. And he tells the whole story of these funny goats that just make you smile
Yeah,
on the back. And that's one of the reasons people collect them, is that story on the back.
yeah.
So yeah, amplifying, I think just telling your story and having your signature can be a great um
Totally. Yeah. I like that idea. Yeah. The back can be an extension of the work, right? There's, Henry Darger,
and the sides.
yeah,
Hmm.
both, yeah, and the sides. Yeah. But some artists, yeah, would make complete pieces on both sides, right? And then it's like, well, which sides, what's the one we look at, right?
Oh, I like that idea. Almost thinking of a painting as a three-dimensional sculpture. I mean, a three-dimensional sculpture, you have to consider all sides and presentation, the base, how you're going to display it. So why
Yeah.
don't we consider two-dimensional work like that? Why don't we consider the sides and the back and the Ooh, I like that idea.
Yeah. It's interesting, right?
Yeah, yeah, totally. All
I'm gonna,
right.
I'm gonna patent that idea.
Oh, do it, do it. I want to see how that works. All right. So L for licensing and contract terms. This scares artists a lot. The idea of having to ask a client for a contract or licensing your work. Do you have any standard contracts that you use all the time, or any terms that you think are important for people to know, that you want to share with us and define in plain English?
I usually negotiate those. Those things are usually I work out with. Galleries are usually the ones who come to me with those types of terms and consignment things, or, we are or we are not responsible if your work falls off the wall and,
Yeah,
breaks. Yeah.
right.
So, I mean, yeah, I don't have a lot of my own
But
personal
you
things.
read them, right?
Oh, I read through them and I make sure. Yeah, if it's something that is where I think the terms aren't aren't good, then yeah, I mean, I try to either renegotiate or, I mean, I try to work through, things whenever possible. I mean, I know the legalities of things. And I mean, we use, I think the college, sometimes if we have like a visiting artist or something, like, there might have to be things like understandings that are reached between the parties, so
Right.
but you have to be careful. Yeah, I mean, there is that sort of business, that legal side to it. And the contract I always wanted, this is like, it's a
Your
sort of thing.
dream contract?
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea that like, hey, like I want you to like not put this work in a basement, like and like, or try to like sell it for a bunch of money that I won't get. And I'm certainly not at that level, so it'd be a stupid contract to make, I guess. But I think that I think artists should start making that contract in terms of speculation on work. But I usually just do that stuff with all galleries have kind of different things that they tend to go by. But yeah, you have to read them. You have to make sure. And yeah, you said it's artists are scared by that stuff, and I don't. I think some artists either don't want to kind of deal with that part of it, or they find it to be maybe off-putting or intimidating. And in the end, it's it's not a huge thing. I mean, you read it, you make sure you're okay with it, and if you're try to read
questions. If you don't know, ask questions.
Yeah. I find most things to be pretty reasonable. And I think there's always a little bit of, again, like I'm not overly precious with my work. There's always a little bit of risk with packing something and putting it in, shipping it across the country. And you have to be, art packing is another thing that's is something that's not you have to be careful with, right? You have to package things well. You have to package them to survive UPS or FedEx
What tips do you have on packaging? Where do you get your packaging materials?
I mean, I tend to build my own packaging. If it's something, I mean, the thing with packaging in the last few years is that, and just really, I mean, I sent stuff I was showing with a gallery in Europe for a while in Spain, and the first exhibition I had there.
How'd you get in there?
That was through the gallery I was working with in New York for a while, had kind of a relationship with them. And so things kind of worked out. And yeah, it was great. It was awesome to be able to show in a country where art, I think, is sort of held to a different sort of cultural standard, like in significance, right? Like it was interesting to have an exhibition and for people to just be like, well, like really invested in what was happening. And even just at like a very sort of general like level, I guess, of the population, like an awareness that maybe it doesn't always happen here, right?
Interesting.
Like accessibility. And so in any case, the first exhibition there, they created the works kind of like fully intact, and some of the paintings were really huge, like 6-foot paintings, 8-foot paintings. And they shipped them over on a boat. It took probably a month or so. And the next exhibition I had, they wanted me to roll the paintings up and ship them, and that was pretty scary because it's hard to. And they also didn't want me to. They were going to restretch them on new stretchers in Spain,
right.
And it's really tricky to restretch a painting that's already been made on a stretcher that's not its original. Right.
Will it crack the paint?
Well, if the painting's made well, that should be okay. And it's packaged and it's rolled properly. The issue is I paint in oil, and I tend to use oftentimes a decent amount of paint, and oil takes a long time to dry. So I was worried about the paintings being destroyed. And a little bit of paint, I put plastic over everything. A little bit of paint did come off, but it didn't ruin anything. Everything was fine. And they did a job of restretching, but it was freaky. And the art handler, they didn't really hire art handlers for that one either. They just sent like kind of random New York, like low down the totem pole kind of shipping, kind of sketchy shippers. Ooh. And these guys showed up and they were like, they had no idea what they were picking up. And there was no sense of like, this is something that is maybe like kind of fragile. So I packed these things, the gallery just said, well, put them in a tube. And I was like, the cardboard tube's not going to, survive this trip. So I built like I was like, this thing is going on a plane to, across the Atlantic. I have to build it to withstand, like a war, basically. Did they arrived, and I mean, I've never had, I just try to gauge like, okay, how far is it going, and and then you look into things like, making sure something is insured, which is also tricky with art. Sometimes they don't want to do full value, but at least if it is insured, they're a little more, I think they're maybe a little more careful with it. But
So you insure your work that's being shown.
well, when I ship it.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha. So S for success. How do you measure success? And how do you celebrate it?
I mean, I think I measure success. I think that's can be, it's very subjective. I think that,
Of
uh,
course, and that's why I asked,
yeah,
especially because I think a lot of artists don't celebrate their success. They just jump from one thing to the next,
yeah,
and they
sure.
don't stop to celebrate the milestones or the things that they have accomplished. We're all guilty of that. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
why I actually added this one on kind of at the end. Is originally the acronym was just appeal. And then I was like, no, we need to measure success and celebrate it. So how do you measure your success and how do you celebrate it?
Well, I mean, for me, you know, I want to, at the end of like a given, I tend to work in series, right? So it's like I'm going to make a body of work. And if I can make a body of work that I'm semi happy with, I find that to be a success. But, I want, it's, I think there's
What
also
makes you
aspect.
happy with your work, Todd? What emotion? How do you when you look at a work, what is it that makes you say, yes, this works for me? Is it emotion? Is it
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. It can be one of those things I mean, I can talk about like, I really like certain formal relationships. I like how the color turned out. I like that. I mean, for
Mhm.
me, it's like, I want paintings to look, I mean, I guess I'm framing that question sometimes in terms of, I mean, it's personal, but it's also maybe in the eyes of the audience to a degree, like thinking what the painting is going to convey. And I mean, I think it goes back to like a book like, the what's it, the Roland Barthes, Camera Lucida, right? This idea of the dictum and the punctum, right? The punctum is sort of like the thing that like reaches out and it kind of pierces the viewer, grabs
Okay.
the emotion versus just kind of the straight up content or the thing that can be seen as like,
Ah,
well, that's a person in a, so like I want my work, yeah, if a painting ends
the
up being,
emotional and the visual.
yeah, sure. Like, and in the end, I want the work to grab people and for there to be, and that the thing that they might be seeing and maybe experiencing, yeah, it's not going to maybe be able to be kind of elucidated very clearly, but there's that thing that just draws you to it. When you're in a museum and there's 20 paintings in front of you and you're just like that one, like, and you gravitate towards it. There's that thing that just does it. And yes,
Yeah.
so for me, like, I might be looking at a studio full of paintings, and it's, as they develop, you start to see the ones that are like, this one's kind of reaching me. And again, that's time. I mean, they don't always reach me right away. Sometimes I have a painting I think is horrible, and I have all these other
Been
paintings,
there, done that.
and then a month later, I say that horrible painting is the best thing in here. Like, again, it's such as much experience as you have, and I think unless you're, really kind of looking and yeah, being critical every day, you can miss things, and
Yeah.
but yeah,
I find that interesting that you say that about the piece because I've had that happen as well. I had an
yeah,
art professor challenge a class. He said, if you guys can make a painting so bad that everybody in the class agrees that it's god awful, ugly, whatever in the critique, you get an A.
that's fantastic.
And I was like, I'm going to do it, man. I am going to do it. I made this painting with neon green and it was like a snail with a giant nose. And I put like gum coming out of the nose. And I thought it was god awful. It was neon green and neon pink and mud colored. And oh, it was god awful. And I took it to class and they were like, this is awesome. And my
See?
best friend was like, this is amazing. I gave it to her. She hung it in her office forever. She was in like, she was in social work and therapy and stuff like that field.
Yeah.
It got stolen. Somebody
Oh,
stole it.
it was so good it got stolen. That's the best compliment you could ever. Your work was stolen. That's amazing. But I bet that was the professor's intention, right? To say if you let your guard down, right, and you think you're making something that's so horrible, there's a good chance it's going to be transformative in a really interesting way,
And
right?
I'll tell you, still to this day, for my art agent, he'll send me trend reports and I'll make artwork for him. And every time he picks the work that I think is most.
And that's what we do is students say that all the time too. They show us a body, hey, I made 10 paintings in the last month. I love this painting. I love this painting. I hate this one here. Yeah, the one you hate's the best one. It's 9 times out of 10, right?
Right. He'll inevitably pick the one that I think is the simplest or the most garish
Yeah.
or, yeah, that's
Or
the
the
way
one
it
that you
works.
felt like you didn't put enough work into. I mean, I think that's a thing I think we, with students we get, and just myself, right? It's this idea that there's a kind of guilt complex I think you have as an artist sometimes if you feel like I didn't put enough like time or effort in. It can't be good yet.
Yeah, like the time and the pain that
It's,
goes into the
yeah, it's a
piece
pain
is
thing. Yeah.
somehow linked to the value of the work.
Yeah, I think there's this sort of masochism with artists, like you have to, the old suffering adage, right? Like we have to suffer a certain amount, or like maybe it's not good. And I try to get students to see the fact, and myself to see the fact that it's the larger, this sort of collective experience and that you've had, right? So it's like I should be able to make a painting fairly quickly now because I've been doing it for. I should have a sense
Right,
of. I
right.
shouldn't have to like labor and labor and labor, even though I often do. And in the end, the trick is for it to not look like it's been like over labored, right?
Right.
But yeah, but sometimes you can't, sometimes the painting just, it can happen, or the work can happen, whatever medium it is. And you have to be able to recognize that, hey, it doesn't need anything else. And I'm really in a moment right now in my work where I'm really trying to do that because it's always been an
Yeah.
issue for me. And I have so many people have come in my studios over the years and like, hey, this is done, right? Well, no, probably not. And, I'm starting to realize, yeah, they were telling me something even then and they were,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's like, maybe I should start to just heed that advice.
I get it because that circle work I was telling you about when I posted circles and it was so simplistic, it was a serious challenge for me as an artist because I was used to doing these layered pieces, multiple exposures in the camera with lots of manipulation or high dynamic range photographs that have these, huge value ranges, or art journals, which have these layers and layers of paint and text and, imagery. And to step back and say, all you're allowed to make is a circle and to keep it so simplistic. And, I was looking at the Asian work, the ensos from, antiquity. And I was doing this because with kids, you can't create that layered kind of work.
Right.
And that simplicity was harder
Mhm.
to me than the really layered work, the big ornate, layered, intricate, detailed work. That's fun, that's meditative. But
Yeah.
creating something simple and stopping
Yeah.
and
You have
say,
to know what to
no,
leave out, know when to stop, right?
so challenging, so
Yeah.
so challenging. I
Really hard.
challenge you, Todd. I challenge you. Try it. Try
I'm gonna
something simple.
gonna try something simple. I'm not a master of simplicity.
I know your work. I've looked at it. I know
Yeah,
I've just given you a hard challenge.
yeah,
Well, thank you so much. I think this has been fabulously fun, a deep conversation
really fun.
about art and creating. Um, Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for.
So, where can people see your work? And I'm gonna edit this. You'll see some work, guys. If you haven't already noticed, I'm gonna put lots of his pictures in here as we talk. But
Yeah.
if somebody wanted to purchase work, do you do commission work, by the way?
No, I don't do commission work. I
Just
mean,
curious. I
it
ask
was
that
like
of a lot of people.
public piece maybe, but not as like, yeah, like a painting or something.
I was just curious. I tend to ask artists if they do commission work because many of them say that it's their most profitable or their
Right.
most successful thing is doing commission work.
Sure.
And that's
Sure.
always a challenge within itself of,
Oh yeah.
that
Yeah.
process.
I mean, I have done commission works for sure. Yeah, yeah. And actually it's been great when I've done it. But yeah, it's just something I tend to not do. I'm not against it. So
Right.
but in any case, people can see my work at toddarsenault.com.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. And what galleries are you in right now?
Right now, I mean, I'm not represented by a specific gallery right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been in shows recently in different places, New York and I think Indianapolis. But yeah, I don't have a specific representation right now.
Do you have any social media handles you'd like to mention?
Don't have so yeah, I'm not on social media. I mean, I do have an Instagram account. I don't remember what it is. And it's like there's nothing on it, so it's gonna be very interesting. I'm
All
horrible
right.
at media, so
All right. So then, since it's the website and the website alone, spell out your website and your name for everyone so that they can get it right.
I will. It is toddarsenault.com. That's toddarsenault.com.
Fantastic. Thank you, Todd.
Yeah.
So great. Such a pleasure.
This is fantastic. Thanks for having me.